Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong wins $133,000 in damages in a defamation suit against blogger Leong Zi-hian.
A study finds that younger and locally born Singaporeans are less likely to feel confident in state institutions and the government.
And stuck in Suez Canal, a giant container ship has ran aground, causing traffic jams in both directions.
Welcome to The Big Story, coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. I'm Olivia Kui.
I'm Haryanto Diman. You can subscribe to the Straits Times channel so you never miss a single episode. For the 12th day in a row, 0 COVID-19 cases were reported in the community.
The 15 cases confirmed today were all imported and put on stay-home notice on arrival in Singapore. More details will be released later tonight.
The High Court has ordered blogger and financial advisor Leong Zi-hian to pay $133,000 to Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong for defamation. The sum includes $100,000 in general damages and $33,000 in aggravated damages. PM Lee had sued Mr. Leong for sharing on Facebook an article from the Malaysian news site, The Coverage. The article had falsely linked PM Lee to the 1MDB corruption scandal.
According to a world values study by the Institute of Policy Studies that examined Singaporeans' attitudes towards institutions, politics and policies, younger and locally born citizens and PRs are less likely to feel confident in state institutions and the government.
At least 70% of the some 2,000 respondents had a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in their state institutions.
These include the government, parliament, courts, Singapore Police Force, Singapore Armed Forces and civil service relative to electoral institutions, civil society and the media.
Around 62% of respondents also feel corruption is low in Singapore.
Well, the study also revealed that about two-thirds of those surveyed are uninterested in politics. Those who had higher levels of interest were male and had higher educational qualifications and income.
Compared with other selected countries, Singaporeans expressed one of the lowest levels of political interest, above only Hong Kong and Taiwan. Conversely, in countries like China, Australia, Sweden and Switzerland, more than 40% of respondents indicated they were very interested or somewhat interested in politics.
Senior political correspondent Grace Ho is here to weigh in. Informative findings that we learnt of today, but this survey was done between November 2019 and March 2020. That's more than a year ago, even before the circuit breaker and of course GE 2020. So Grace, since then, do you think trends towards confidence in state institutions and the government have shifted?
Well, it's hard to tell because the data since then hasn't been available. But one thing that wouldn't have changed that much is the level of confidence that people have in state institutions, because these are permanent institutions. I mean, your courts, the police, the army, the civil service. And if anything, the whole of government response to COVID-19 could even have been a shot in the arm for this public perception of the government's ability to rally resources and to solve problems quickly. Generally, I think if people see that the state has performed well in the provision of public services and that it's not corrupt, then the arrival of the circuit breaker and GE 2020 probably wouldn't have changed opinions that much.
Right. Grace, one of the more significant findings was that naturalized citizens and PRs were more likely to be confident in state and electoral institutions compared with Singaporeans born here. Now, older respondents were also more likely to have high levels of confidence. Why are we not seeing, though, similar sentiments among younger and locally born citizens?
Yeah, so, they have more confidence not just in these institutions, but also confidence in the government in general compared to younger respondents. It may be because older Singaporeans have experienced effective government policy decisions and they saw, major progress in Singapore's society, infrastructure, and the economy over the decades. So they've had a longer runway to develop higher levels of trust. Conversely, younger respondents who grew up in an already highly developed economy might not have witnessed that huge margin of progress that the government made. And this might explain the hesitation to accord high levels of confidence in the government. In tandem with this is also a more diverse local political scene. So we've had several newly formed political parties emerging since 2012, which was when the last survey was conducted. So when you have a more educated population with greater knowledge of different political parties, they can be expected to be more critical when they evaluate the government. As for naturalized citizens and PRs, it may be because they have their country of origin as a basis for comparison, and they might find that the economic and political situation here in Singapore is more conducive. But there is a caveat because out of the 2012 Singaporeans surveyed in this study, just over 300 were naturalized citizens and PRs. So you have a comparatively smaller proportion of them in the sample size, and the results might not exactly be representative of the wider population of naturalized citizens and PRs.
Right. That's a really great point, Grace. So the survey also found that Singaporeans seem to be supportive of government surveillance, but not when it comes to private situations or without their prior knowledge. Why the double standard, so to speak?
Well, instead of calling a double standard, perhaps we can think of it as most Singaporeans support having some kind of surveillance in public areas because of safety and security reasons. In fact, two-thirds of them in the survey felt that the government has the right to keep people under video surveillance in public areas. So having, say, CCTVs, may have a deterrent effect. Let's say if you get robbed or assaulted, then, video records would be useful. But where Singaporeans draw the line is in private spaces or where they feel like, hey, you haven't informed me, because these are situations where the law and order imperative perhaps isn't quite so clear to many people, and they have a stronger sense that their privacy has been invaded. But again, there are differences in attitudes based on age. So older Singaporeans were more accepting of government surveillance, whether it's in public or private spaces, whether they are informed or not informed. And this could be due to, say, the digital divide between the older and younger generations. Younger Singaporeans, for example, might be more aware of dangers of attacks on their privacy, online phishing, and might be more skeptical of surveillance. But I think what is worth noting generally are the policy implications, right? So there is this wide range of attitudes towards surveillance, which means that when the government undertakes this surveillance, it has to be transparent and to also be quite careful when collecting and using citizens' data. And the other broader point also is that you can do successful government surveillance only when there continues to be a healthy baseline level of public confidence in state institutions and public satisfaction with the current political system. So all these different elements which we have discussed today, need to go hand in hand.
Well, as always, thanks for your time, Grace. We've been speaking with Grace Ho, Senior Political Correspondent at the Straits Times. You can read Grace's two stories on this IPS survey on straitstimes.com.
Following the news of a police probe into a group of Neon Poly students in an alleged harassment case, the police said yesterday that as part of its investigation, it has identified the students involved, and none are freshmen.
MP also said the incident did not take place during the school's freshman orientation program or as preparations for it.
Meanwhile, according to news reports, an Instagram user had come forward on Monday night, claiming that he was one of the two people that was urinated on. He described the incident as consensual, adding that it wasn't bullying.
Now, regardless of whether the incident was consensual or not, let's talk about this culture of hazing with sociologist Dr. Tan Eun Seo from the National University of Singapore. Welcome, Dr. Tan. Doctor, why is hazing or any form of initiation considered a rite of passage to belong to a particular group?
Well, first of all, I think rite of passage can be a positive thing. But unfortunately, I would say that hazing is not one of them. It's not one of the positive ones. But having said that, I think if you think of it as an initiation ceremony, right? It is something that organizations do, groups do, when they bring in new members. They want them to be able to transit from their old role to a new role. So more generally, I would argue that initiation ceremony usually have to do with like let's say you transit from from being a child to being an adult, from being a student in the university to being an adult in the workplace. So in that sense, it is something that is, I would say, necessary, happen all the time, and actually it can be positive, but not hazing.
For the people being hazed, no matter in what institution or what organization they're in, why do they even put up with it?
Well, it could be that they choose to join the organization. It could be that they feel coerced or sort of forced into joining the organization because they want to be part of the in-group. And then once they're in the organization, they have to do what the organization requires of them to do, right? To show their commitment, to show that they are willing to break out of things that they used to do before, to be transiting from, like I said before, being a child to being an adult, for instance.
Right. Doctor, we most often see hazing in US fraternities, whether it's real news reports or depicted in TV or film. Do you think that has influenced how initiation is being carried out in our institutions?
Well, I think we are very much influenced by Western TV, in particular American TV. Of course, in recent years, I mean, there are all kinds of channels from all over the world, right? But I would say that there is some kind of imitation effect. I mean, you imitate what you think is cool, you imitate what is in fashion. So I think by the same token, there's an attempt to do so. You just want to do what you think is really cool and what you think is really fun, right?
Right. Well, there are positive, let's say, consequences to the initiation practice. For example, Haryanto, I'm sure that you and I have gone through such orientation programs
when
we were
schools,
in. Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So, like I said, so there are positive effects to this. So, Dr. Tan, how can institutions continue with this initiation practice while, preventing it from going too far?
Okay, first of all, I absolutely agree that, initiation ceremony is absolutely necessary. I mean, when you get to a new organization, I mean, you need to learn the new roles that they are playing, the expectation that they have, right? But having said that, I don't think hazing not need to be necessarily harmful, necessarily humiliating. I think it can be actually be fun, be very constructive and positive. So some examples of games that we can play be like, for example, we hear of speed dating, right? That means we go around, get to know one another, and then we ask the person, say, why don't you introduce your friend on the left and then the friend on the right? So that's one possibility. Or it could be playing games like, that involve teamwork. You go for a treasure hunt. I know this is sort of old school, right? You go for a treasure hunt, you work with one another, and in the process, you learn a lot about one another. All right, maybe what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, what they can or cannot do. So I think that there are initiation ceremonies okay. Getting to know one another, I think is absolutely necessary. But I think it can involve games and other practices that can be positive and constructive in the process.
Right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show, Dr. Tan. That was Dr. Tan Eun Se, a sociologist from the National University of Singapore.
Looking overseas, Myanmar activists are planning a silent strike, with many businesses closing and calls for people to stay home. This coming a day after a 7-year-old girl was shot dead in her Mandalay home when soldiers opened fire at her father. Meanwhile, ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi is due for another court hearing via video conferencing today. Her previous hearing had to be adjourned because of internet issues.
Take a look at this. A 400-meter-long container ship is wedged lengthwise across the Suez Canal. It's causing a pileup of at least 100 vessels seeking to transit between the Red Sea and Mediterranean in one of the world's busiest maritime trade routes. A gust of wind had blown the vessel off course, and tugboats were seen trying to refloat the ship, with an excavator attempting to dig out the ship's bow.
The 76-year-old Chinese grandmother who fought back against her alleged assailant in San Francisco will be donating nearly $1 million raised for her to the Asian American and Pacific Islander community. Madam Xie Xiaochen's family made the announcement on the GoFundMe campaign page, which was initially set up to pay for her medical bills.
Well, those are our top stories for today. For more news and videos, visit straitstimes.com and subscribe to our YouTube channel by hitting the red button below.
Once again, I'm Haryanthadiman with Olivia Quay. Join us tomorrow for more stories on The Big Story.